We're going to talk today about the Jackie Aina situation that's been going on. I'm a little bit nervous about this video just because it is a sensitive topic, but listen. I try not to get involved in drama on this channel because there's just a lot of drama going on at all times that I could get involved in, not the kind of life that I want to lead. So, okay, talking drama. For those of you who don't know, Jackie Aina put a tweet up, I think it was 2 days ago as of this recording. If you see me looking over here, it's because that's where my mirror is. I can't, unfortunately, my new camera does not have a attached monitor, so I can't monitor what I'm doing by staring directly into the camera the way that I used to. Anyway, so Jackie Aina put on some tweets. The first one was, I'll try to put a screenshot of it up here, or here, one of these directions, here or here. But basically she said that white people are rude to her because something to the effect of, you can tell that they want to say excuse me when they do something, like they get in her way or they bump into her, but they just don't do it. They just sort of like sit there with it on the tip of their tongue and don't get the words out. And her theory was basically that they realize that she's not going to say it first, so they don't say it. And this sort of set off a crap storm of people saying, I'm white and I say excuse me and you shouldn't just lump all white people together like that. But basically the gist of it was that she was being racist by lumping people together that way. And then, of course, there were people on Jackie's side basically saying, if you're not one of the people she's talking about, then why are you mad? After that, Jackie kind of dug her heels in and it turned into a thing. Okay, so let's talk about it. Before I get into it, let me just say, let me speak the perspective that I'm coming from. So as you may have noticed, I am myself a woman of color. My father was black. He was also, and this is for full disclosure purposes, he was also a black activist. He had a blog for many years, he had a blog dealing with politics and racial issues. The point is that I did grow up with a father who was particularly interested in these topics. I did study them in college. I wasn't a Black Studies major, but I did take most of the classes as electives when I was studying psychology, and I also took a lot of sociology. So it's sort of an issue that I am familiar with, that I have opinions on. So I'm just going to say that up front, in case anybody is like, I don't know, expecting me not to have an opinion. Although I doubt that it would really make sense for you to expect that, because if I didn't have an opinion, I wouldn't be making this video, right? So here we go. And like everybody else, I'm slightly nervous about it because this is cancellation territory. But on the upside, I don't actually have many subscribers to begin with. I think I'm at like 13 right now. So how canceled can I get? First things first, the original tweet. People say things in a generalized fashion all the time. Like women say men suck, men say women are whatever. Obviously, if somebody says that, they don't generally mean every person of that group in the history of humanity has always behaved this way. They mean, in my personal experience, the people that I have come into contact with from this group have had the tendency to do these things. Sometimes they mean this has happened recently a lot, or I've noticed a pattern of this happening, or whatever. But nobody is ever saying every human being who ever existed who fit this category, this broad category, has also done XYZ a thing. So for me, the outrage over the fact that she said white people have done XYZ, and like, if you want to get mad about that, that's one thing. But if you want to get mad about it because you're saying that she's saying that you personally, as a white person, are being rude to her or to black people in general. I feel like that's knee-jerk, and that's not helpful. The issue that she's trying to raise is that, as a generality, and let's put aside for a moment the question of whether or not this is actually true, because we will get back to that. This idea that, as a generality, white people expect deference from people of color. So if they bump into her, or they're trying to get someplace and she's coming from the same direction, going in the opposite direction, and they're about to collide, they have the assumption that because she is a person of color and they are white, let's put it this way. Okay, the subconscious assumption, not the conscious assumption. Like, they're not walking down the street thinking, oh, I bumped into her, but because she's black, she should be the one to say, excuse me. That's not what is being implied here. What's being implied is that because of subconscious assumptions and cultural forces, there is the tendency to assume that if a white person and a black person are coming into conflicting contact, then the black person should be the one who defers. And that is the issue that she's raising. And, okay, I gotta say this. It's true. To a white person, this is not something that is visible, in part because they're never on the receiving end of it, right? And whether they are guilty of doing it themselves or not, it's not necessarily something that is on their radar. So they're not necessarily going to notice it. The experience of life in, I'm going to say America because that's where I live and where Jackie Aina lives, but I can't, and I don't have any experience with other countries, but the experience of living in America is that, as a general rule, there is the unspoken assumption that a black person will tend to defer to a white person. In most cases, again, it's not something that they're consciously thinking about, and in the case of white people, it may not even be something that they're aware is happening. Whether they're doing it or not, they may not be aware that it's happening. And I'm not saying that if you as a white person are thinking, oh, I don't do that, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm saying that you're wrong and you do it. What I'm saying is that even if you did it, you might not realize that you do it. And that's one of the problems with institutional or societal level racism. The people who perpetuate it are not necessarily aware that they are perpetuating it. And they may be perpetuating it without meaning any active harm and without having any conscious biases against those groups. And that is what makes it so difficult to talk about, because you might have people who are, in all honesty, against racism, and who, in all honesty, don't feel that black people or Latino people or any other people are deserving of discrimination or lesser than. Okay then, back to what we were doing. My camera cut off. What was I saying? I said that people who honestly mean no harm can continue to perpetuate stereotypes and oppression simply by existing in the world as they know it, without realizing that that's what they're doing. Yeah, so that's basically where I lost my train of thought, because I was like, I can't. When people say, okay, but if a white person said that about a person of color or people of color as a group, there would be rioting. First of all, people love to say that, but I'm not sure that that's actually true, because people say shitty things about, people say crappy things about people of color all the time, and they continue to thrive in this community. And I don't have to name some of them. There's more than one. I don't have to name them in order for you to know some of the people that I'm talking about. These are people who have been documented as saying terrible things even recently, and people will bend over backwards to excuse it or to blow it off or to claim that it never happened. And yet when Jackie says something like that, they are all up in arms. and talking about how if a white person said that, then that person would be insta-canceled, but that's just not the case. I mean, listen, come on.
Hey, editing Ariel here. I just wanted to say that I actually forgot to give part 2 of my point, which was that it's not the same thing. Listen, you can say that it's wrong, you can say that it's a generalization, but it's not the same thing as a stereotype being imposed on an oppressed group, okay? Because there's no power behind it. Yeah, it's just annoying. Like, you have to understand that the experience that black people have is completely different than the experience that white people have. And much like the use of the N-word, that creates a difference in context behind the usage of certain phrases and comments. You can not like it, you can disagree with it, you can say it's a generalization. It is a generalization. You can say that it's not accurate, and it isn't strictly accurate, because of course some white people say excuse me to whoever, like, whatever. Like, you can object to the fact that she generalized, but it's just not the same thing as a white person saying it about black people. And also, if a white person did say it about black people, they would not in fact be insta-canceled, no matter how many times people like to claim that that would be the case. This is a huge issue, because a lot of defensive postures that minorities, and especially black people in this context, take in order to protect themselves, in order to allow them to take, I guess, like a minimum of emotional damage. The defensive postures that they adopt in order to do this are taken as aggressive postures by white people who don't understand the context that gave rise to those defensive postures. And black people who try to explain it are not understood, because the things that cause those things to come up are invisible to white people. And some white people just don't believe those things are there because they can't see them themselves. It reminds me of a conversation that I had at one of my jobs where they were insisting that there's no such thing as sexism in the world because the legal barriers to women doing X, Y, and Z have been dissolved. And I'm trying to tell him that even though the legal barriers have been dissolved, the societal barriers remain intact. The biases remain intact. The assumptions remain intact. But he's just not seeing it. And of course he's not seeing it because he's a guy and never encounters those obstacles and those attitudes. So it's just not part of his life. And it's frustrating because the assumption is if you try to explain the context of these defensive postures, then people are like, well, you're paranoid, you're making everything about race. People being rude isn't about race, but sometimes people being rude is about race. And these experiences just kind of accumulate. And I know that everybody has experienced somebody not saying excuse me at an appropriate moment. But there's a difference between that happening to you because you met a rude person and that happening to you consistently and almost exclusively when dealing with a certain type of person. And that is when you start to say things like, white people don't say excuse me.
The implications of that and how the ripples go. Like, if you talk about white privilege, even the word privilege means something different to white people than to black people. Because when somebody says, oh, there's white privilege, a white person might think, what privilege do I have? I was born poor, I worked for everything I ever had, I didn't have a trust fund, I had to study through school like everybody else, I had to apply to get into various colleges like everyone else, I worked my way up the corporate ladder, or I haven't worked my way up the corporate ladder. Or they might think, you know, I'm at the poverty level, I'm living with government assistance, I'm struggling to make ends meet just like everybody else. What is this privilege that you're talking about? Because to a white person, the word privilege is going to imply some sort of active benefit. And that, I think, is where you get situations like people saying that minorities actually have more privilege because there's quotas or because there are specific outreach programs trying to recruit minorities, women, that kind of thing. And so they start to feel like, well, I'm fighting an uphill battle trying to be noticed in a system that is geared toward trying to reach out to specific groups like women and people of color. And so they start to feel like maybe I'm the disadvantaged one. Some people start to feel that way. And thus you get, you know, white people saying, well, white people are more discriminated against than any other group now. Which is not correct. To a person of color, what privilege means is not having to think about the part of them that doesn't fit the societal definition of normal, because it does not disadvantage them in any way. So for a black person, what white privilege is the fact that white people don't have to worry about the fact that they're white. Don't have to think that not get hired or promoted because they're white. That they might be followed around a store because they're white. And that's just a different thought on what privilege even is. To an oppressed group, privilege is not an active advantage, it is the lack of a disadvantage. I'm at like a natural stopping point in the conversation, and my battery is low, and I don't want to be stressed about that, so I'm actually going to pause and recharge the battery, get some water, come back, finish this situation here. Okay, so we are back, and back to talking. What was I talking about? That was like a half an hour ago, because I had to recharge my things a little bit in order to continue in a useful manner. What was I saying? I was saying something about how white privilege is... right, the word privilege for people of color is actually the absence of disadvantage, whereas for white people, it can be registered as the existence of advantage. This is something that I learned in psychology. I'm just going to side trip into it a little bit, which is that when you have a situation where one group has been historically advantaged over the other one, that group will tend to feel the loss of advantage as a creeping oppression. They don't see it as sides becoming equalized. They see it as their side becoming disadvantaged. And this is something that has been documented in the social sciences. That's, I think, a lot of where some of these reactions come from. And also, Jackie Aina in particular can tend to be a bit of a lightning rod for controversy. There's some reasons that are her own fault, like the situation with Petty Page. That's something that she did to herself, obviously. On the other hand, there's also some things that I don't think have anything to do with anything other than the fact that she's the most visible, dark-skinned black woman in the beauty community, and that she's vocal about racial issues. Now, obviously, this filming has been a little bit like hodgepodge, so I kind of like keep losing track of what it is that I'm trying to say because I keep stopping and starting, and I apologize for that. Like, if I sound like a crazy person, I really do apologize for that. Where I'm coming from on this is basically, I don't think that her original tweet was as big a deal as people like to make it out to be. I understand why people were offended by it, but I don't actually think that it was objectively offensive, unless you find every generalization in the world objectively offensive and are offended by them. Like, you could argue that any given generalization is offensive, but are you offended by it, or do you take it in the context that it's intended and sort of take it as it's meant, right? Parse it into its actual meaning instead of getting hung up on the wording. Because I think to some degree that is what was happening. And let me just be clear here. I like Jackie. Some of the things that she's done are incredibly problematic. I do think that she can tend to get stuck on a high horse. Like, if somebody criticizes her, she can tend to get really defensive and dig her heels in instead of admitting to whatever problematic thing she just did. I don't know why that is. I don't know her. There could be some issues going on there, or it could just be like a personality trait. I don't know. And to some degree it's not relevant because we're talking about how her behavior affects a community. I'm just saying that because I don't want it to be people to think that I'm just like a Jackie Aina stan and unable to recognize when she's being problematic. Like, I know that she can be problematic sometimes. I just don't think that this particular tweet was that big a freaking deal. Now, some of her reactions to the offense are a little bit over the top. And there's a couple of different ways to look at that. You could say, that was super rude, what's wrong with her? And to some degree, that is probably warranted. On the other hand, if you try to look at it in the context of the world that she lives in, the experience that she has, the experience that people of color have, then you might say, maybe she's just tired of being picked apart for saying things that other people would say and not get picked apart for. Like, that's part of the problem. The fact that she says things and they become a huge deal because whether she's correct in this perception or not, the perception is that it's because she's black. Even if that's not the case in a specific instance of a white person objecting to what she said, it's still a valid interpretation because it is a thing that happens in the lives of black people that white people are not necessarily aware of because it's not a part of their experience. And this is why it's complicated, because you have to understand that different people are coming from different places and that everything that we say comes from our own experience of this world. Her reaction may seem very out of nowhere for some people who don't have the context that she has, and then it might be completely understandable for people who have had the same sorts of experiences as Jackie. I personally, and I've said this before, I think I said this, but I'm not sure if it got cut off or not, right? I personally haven't had, like, a ton of experience with virulent racism or directed at me, but I have seen it, because obviously my father's family's black, my father was black. I took a lot of black studies courses, so we had a lot of discussions about these issues. If I do this, you can't even see what I'm doing. I apologize. Angles are angles, and I'm still kind of getting used to the new angles. But it's difficult because most people don't necessarily walk around thinking that their experience of the world is, like, subjective, and that they don't see everything. Like, even if they know that, they don't necessarily see that. I'm not sure if that makes sense outside of my own brain. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from on the Jackie tweet. Do I think she could have responded to the responses better? In some cases, yes. In some cases, I completely get where she was coming from. And in some cases, I probably would have said the same thing. It just depends on the tweet. And now, the whole thing about whether or not a white person can be a genuine ally and her comments about tokenism. Okay, let me try to work through that. The comments that she made to me as a person of color and as a person who has been involved in these situations to some degree, or at least from the outskirts of the situation. I don't think she was trying to say that no white person can be a genuine ally. I think she's talking about the phrasing of the people who are saying, oh, well, now I'm going to unsubscribe from you. Can somebody recommend another woman of color that I can support? Because if you think about that phrasing, what does that imply? It implies that they were only supporting one woman of color, and now that they're getting rid of her, they have to find a new one. That may not be what they meant, but that's what the phrasing implies, and because it is a thing that actually happens in black people's actual day-to-day lives, where people want to prove that they're not racist by having, like, one black friend, or by hiring one black person, and then when that person gets fired or quits or gets promoted or moves to a different company, whatever, they're like, oh, well, we have to hire another black person to replace that black person. And it's just, like, annoying. It's obnoxious. It's a way of thinking about people that is not helpful or flattering at all. And I think that's what she meant. She wasn't saying that no white person watches her videos because they actually like her videos. She was saying that these people who are saying, well, now Jackie is canceled, so we have to find a new black person to support. If you're interested in other black creators, then why weren't you already watching other black creators? Why did you wait until you got sick of this one and then decided to phase her out and had to go, like, to be like, oh, well, now I need a new one, right? That's what she's talking about when she talks about tokenism. She wasn't saying that every white person is tokenizing her, or that every white person is incapable of being a true ally to people of color. That said, I do think that white people can be true allies to people of color. However, there is a problem there. And that problem is that we don't have the same, and this applies to some degree within the community of a certain race, right? Because you still have these stratifications based on, say, colorism, right? So like, I am a person of color, but I don't have the same minority experience as a darker-skinned person of color, or even a lighter-skinned person of color. When she says something like that, you have to understand that it's coming from the context of her experience as a black woman with darker skin. She's not talking from the perspective of, you know, me, or of a white person. We all have different understandings of what the world looks like based on the world as it looks to us, which is influenced strongly by things like race, gender, sexual orientation, gender expression. Whoa, that was more than I expected, because I'm not paying that much attention. Okay, we're just gonna blend that out and hope for the best. Oh, right. I remember what I was going to say. If you want to be an ally to people of color, just like if a straight person wants to be a queer ally, right? You have to understand that sometimes the things that you're hearing are not going to be interpreted the same way by people of color as they are by you. They're not going to be heard the same way, because the worlds that we live in are slightly different depending on these things. And not just, I mean, obviously it's not even just race, not even just gender, not even just sexual orientation. It's things like class, it's things like education level, it's things like subculture. These things all overlap and interact in order to create the specific kind of a world that we perceive when we perceive the world. That means something different to everybody, which means that words can sometimes mean something subtly different to different people. In the end, nobody who has a kind of a privilege can understand what it's like to live in the world without that privilege, because you have it. You can theorize about what it would be like, and you can observe, but you don't really know. I am obviously rather light-skinned, which means that I do not encounter a lot of the BS that darker-skinned people do. These issues make me think about discussions that I had with my dad, which make a lot more sense in retrospect, because he used to say certain things when I was a teenager, and I really didn't get it at all. I remember one time we were walking home, and we were talking about black women and hair, and I just didn't have any idea, anything about the huge part of black women's lives that hair can play, that hours spent in salons, the painful chemical treatments. I had no idea. And he said, you wouldn't understand because your hair has always been beautiful. And, okay, listen, before y'all come hating on my father, he didn't mean it like that. He meant that I always had societally acceptable hair, right? Which is true. But I remember I told him that when I was in school, I actually used to get teased for my hair. They used to say, Ariel has a nappy pussy. And I hated my hair, but here's my point. Like, my point is not to say that my hair struggle is in any way equivalent to the hair struggle of somebody who has, like, 4C hair, because my hair type has always been sort of held up as an acceptable type of woman of color hair. And I recognize that. I don't have any problem acknowledging that. So I'm not trying to say that the way that I was made fun of is at all equivalent of the lifelong push against ethnic hair of other types. What I'm trying to say is I was completely clueless about that struggle. To me, my hair struggle was the worst thing. I wore tight braids and ponytails for most of my life, which is part of why I have tension alopecia. And I had no idea that people who had afros, that kind of thing, had even worse problem. And then meanwhile, my dad, he didn't realize that I had any kind of hair struggle, because to him, my hair was always the ideal that had been held up as societally acceptable in his part of the culture at that time. And meanwhile, for me, I kind of liked all those long braids, like, you know, Nobody made fun of the people. Well, I'm sure they did, honestly, but I didn't see it. Girls with their long braids and such like that. For me, they didn't have a struggle, but I did. So I mean, like, I could be a little Pollyanna and be like, can't we just all understand each other? Of course, it's never going to be that simple. It would be nice if it were. But that's where I stand on it. And since I'm here and not done with my face yet, I'm going to talk about the Too Faced thing. You probably know that I've always kind of liked Too Faced. I even put up a Too Faced product in my Things I Still Totally Want video that went up before this one, which I filmed before the drama happened. I'm not sure if I would have put it there or not if the drama had already happened, because, and this is one of the things I'm going to talk about, that was really tone deaf of them. Of Jerrod. And I don't know if I was offended, but I was like, you know what I mean? People were saying he was obviously mocking the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm not sure if I would say that he was obviously mocking it. I mean, he was obviously referencing it in a parodic way. I feel like it was more of a really, really badly considered in-joke, which is not an excuse, by the way. Like, I'm not excusing it at all. Plus, it did make it to social media, whether it should have or not, so obviously he has to deal with the fallout of that. It was stupid, basically. It was stupid and it was tone deaf. Stupid tone deaf stuff needs to stop happening. It needs to stop happening. I mean, I'd like to go a few months without any kind of stupid tone deaf brand drama that doesn't need to happen. I don't know if I'm ready to cancel Too Faced, not just because I like them, but because, and maybe I'll make a video about this one day, I don't associate Too Faced with Jerrod strongly enough to feel like I have to condemn the entire brand in order to disagree with what he does. Unlike, say, the Kat Von D thing or Jeffree Star, where I do sort of feel like those brands are so deeply tied to those individuals that I really couldn't feel comfortable with myself if I were supporting them after the things that their CEOs or whatever did. And I feel like that's some place where individual judgment, you know, what brands are strongly linked to a particular personality. I don't even know who the chief of, I don't know, Maybelline is, right? I have no idea who it is. And if they did something terrible, I'm not sure that I would, well, no, I probably wouldn't cancel Maybelline for that. I would only cancel Maybelline for things that the brand as a brand did. This is one of those things that come down to individual judgment, but it does sort of raise the question of what is it that makes a brand so heavily linked with the founder that disapproving of the founder means that you have to disapprove of the brand. And I'm curious about where people come down on that. For example, people have pointed out that Yves Saint Laurent had done some really, really terrible things while he was alive. So then the discussion becomes, okay, so do we cancel YSL? And my thought is no, because that person is not at all benefiting from things that happened with YSL, because he's dead. So I personally kind of walk a line there. That's just the way that it goes. Battery is low again, so if it cuts off, you know why. But I should be done in time. I don't know why the beauty community is so freaking dramatic. Like, it's about makeup, calm down. I'll probably film the other things that I was intending to film maybe tomorrow. I don't really mind this interruption of my schedule as such, except that I do mind that racism keeps coming up. That's not the best. But, okay, so I'm just going to put on some lipstick and call it a beat. And if you're wondering, no, I'm not going to put on concealer. I forgot to bring some over here. So we're gonna stop it there. Alright, so thank you for tuning into today's video. The first episode, well, I guess it's the honorary second episode, but it's the first official episode of the Brain Beat. If you did enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Maybe hit the notification button. Ooh, you could do that. Comment down below. Let me know what you think. This is a particularly controversial topic, so I actually am really interested in what you think. If you want to, you know, let me know. And if you don't want to let me know, then I'm going to read the comments of other videos, and then I will probably find out what people think that way. Yeah, so please, if you did enjoy the video, please do those things. If you didn't enjoy the video, let me know that too. I don't, whatever, you know, whatever works for you. And I will see you in my next one. Bye. I'm purple as heck. I'm looking like a Christmas present.